Hi, thanks for joining us. Myself, Steve Hayes, and Michael Darby from Element, as we talk to you about cyber and the requirements coming along for cyber assessments that are needed for getting products onto the European market, and cyber in a more general context as well, I guess.
Yeah, I would say so. So like many of us in the regulatory approvals world, that we've been dealing with safety, EMC and radio for years, never really expected to become cybersecurity experts. And yeah, here we are. It seems to be the thing that everyone wants to know about. I think with our connected products on the marketplace, there are various things that have been triggers for moving the industry in the direction of cybersecurity. Everything from products being hacked to real life cases of people using baby monitors to be able to look into people's homes, people using wearable technology to track individuals, and of course the fact that we do all our banking online. Suddenly cybersecurity is a big deal, and all the different regions of the world have taken it up in their own different ways. Probably would have been nice to have bit more global harmonization, but this is a world we
Keeps us busy.
Exactly.
Right, let's start with the basics then. I guess let's have a European focus to this to start with. And so, radio products, let's start with how are they regulated? How is cyber regulated for radio products? Because I think that's sort of the first one out of the blocks.
Right. Well, interestingly, you said European rather than European Union. So I'll go slightly off topic and go the UK, which is in Europe but not part of the European Union. The UK regulates its products and its cyber security through an act known as the PSTI. That's been in place since the 29th of April 2024. So any kind of consumer IoT device sold into the UK since April 2024 needs to be meeting the PSTI. The requirements actually are pretty simple. There's an ETSI standard EN 303645, and the PSTI just picks out 3 or 4 very basic requirements from that standard, really quite minimal: password, manufacturer, keeping up to date with it, and it's a statement of compliance. It's not part of CE marking, it's not part of UKCA marking, it's a separate regulation just for the UK.
So the UK PSTI is equivalent to another thing in the EU then.
Exactly.
The Cyber Resilience Act.
So in the EU, we have different directives, CE marking directives for different types of equipment. So for example, if you have an electronics device, you'd maybe apply the EMC directive and perhaps the low voltage directive for your CE marking. If you have a radio-enabled product, you would apply the Radio Equipment Directive instead of those. And in the Radio Equipment Directive, which is a CE marking directive, a new kind of subset or a new aspect has been enacted, and it's known as the Cyber Security Requirements. It's Article 3.3 D, E and F of the Radio Equipment Directive. Article 3.3 D covers anything which could be connected directly or indirectly to the internet. And it's all about radio equipment connecting directly or indirectly to the internet. And it's to protect the network from people, but also to protect people from other people coming in through the network. So you hear of companies being hacked through fish tanks or through air conditioning sensors, but you could also imagine somebody at home using the internet to disrupt the ambulance service or the fire service. So it's a kind of two-way concern. So that's 3.3D of the Radio Equipment Directive, and then 3.3E is all about products which can hold personal data or be wearable technology or childcare. It doesn't have to connect to the internet. That's an interesting thing about this. It's not exclusively internet connected. And then 3.3F is for anything where a financial transaction occurs. So you've got these 3 aspects to the Radio Equipment Directive. So this is radio-enabled equipment. Interestingly, let's say you've got a Ethernet, a wired internet connected device, but it's got GPS in it, or RFID. And therefore, it's in scope of the Radio Equipment Directive, but the internet connection isn't a wireless thing. It would still be in scope of the RED's cyber requirements, because it's in scope of the RED because of the GPS or RFID, and it's internet connected through the Ethernet cable. So the point then is that your product would be in scope of the RED if it connects to the internet or holds data or is used for transactional exchanges of currency, for example. Then it's in scope of the cyber requirements. Those cyber security requirements will become live or a mandatory requirement from the 1st of August 2025. So manufacturers of radio equipment who are selling any new units of existing products or new products on the 1st of August 2025 will need to, as part of their risk assessment, look at the cyber parts and go, do any of these requirements apply to me and my product? And if they do, then I need to assess their product. There are standards. They may or may not be harmonized standards by the time the 1st of August comes around. And then we can come back and talk about this in more detail. But we're recording this today, November the 20th, 2024. The Cyber Resilience Act was published on the EC's official journal today, and it becomes a live document on the 11th of December 2027. So the Cyber Resilience Act will kind of replace those Radio Equipment Directive requirements for most products. So they'll dramatically reduce the amount of products that are in scope of the Radio Equipment Directive cyber requirements from the 11th of December 2027.
So just so we get this right then.
Yeah.
So we've got the CRA, which has got nothing to do with cyber resilience, nothing to do with CE marking.
No.
There's a UK version, or equivalent, I should say, called PSTI.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with UKCA or CE marking either.
Correct.
The CRA comes in at the end of 2027.
Correct.
And the UK PSTI is already in force.
Correct.
Those are applicable.
Those are some facts.
And nothing to do with CE marking.
Correct.
If you make a piece of radio equipment, then we have from August next year some bolt-on additional requirements to the Radio Equipment Directive for radio products that directly or indirectly connect to the internet.
Yeah.
And that's applicable from August 2025.
Yes.
And is required for CE marking.
Yes.
So, what happens then when the CRA comes into force, so the end of 2027?
Yeah.
I've now got two sets of cyber requirements.
Yes.
One under the CRA and one under the Radio Equipment Directive.
Yeah.
Do both apply?
Good question. So, when we first started having these conversations, we used to say, so the Radio Equipment Directive cyber requirements would come out on the 1st of August 2025. They'd be valid for about 2.5 years or 2.25 years. And then when the Cyber Resilience Act comes in at the end of 2027, they would repeal the Radio Equipment Directive cyber. They've now realised that, so the Cyber Resilience Act is a lot broader than the RED. The RED just applies for radio equipment, hardware. The Cyber Resilience Act covers all digital equipment and radio equipment, hardware and software. So a much broader scope. But there are some types of product, like vehicular equipment, that are not in scope of the Cyber Resilience Act, or maybe partially in scope.
And why is that? Is that because it's covered under separate legislation, like automotive stuff?
Exactly. Yeah. Covered by other groups, other legislations. And so the Cyber Resilience Act, therefore, will come along, and we used to say that they would repeal the RED cyber parts, but actually they've realised if they completely repealed it, there could be some items that are left without any cyber assessment. So rather than repeal, we're saying we're modifying. So any product that is going to be in scope of the RED cyber and then would be in scope of the CRA would be removed from the RED. So you wouldn't have a duplication. You'd have 2 and a bit years of RED compliance, and then you'd go into the CRA.
So what happens if I'm a manufacturer of radio products?
Yeah.
and I've tested to these standards that you've mentioned. I think there's 3 standards, right?
There are.
I've tested to those, and now suddenly I've got the CRA coming in. Is everything that I've done wasted?
Good question. So these 3 standards, they are known as EN 18031-1 for the internet connected, -2 for the data carrying wearable child use products, and -3 for the financial transactions. So these EN 18031 standards, they're being written by a standards group called CENELEC. And the world's cyber experts have come together and written these standards. They've finished writing those standards now, and they've submitted them to the European Commission, and then they've said, here you are, European Commission, here are your standards for the Radio Equipment Directive. Those same individuals that have written those standards are now writing the standards for the Cyber Resilience Act. And everybody is looking at these people and saying, don't make it too big a step or a change. We want to move smoothly. So I can't sit here and guarantee you won't have anything new to do. You may have new things to do because the structure of the CRA is slightly different to the structure of the RED. If you make a non-radio product, you're suddenly going to be in scope of the CRA, things like that. So I imagine a little step change, but it won't be rip up everything I've done and start again, because the same working group are working on the standards for the CRA as we're working on the standards for the RED.
And so in terms of the standards, and under CE marking, we normally, if a radio standard was published but is not considered to be harmonised, then we need a notified body.
Yeah.
What happens under cyber then?
So yes, if you look at the aspects of the Radio Equipment Directive, we break it down loosely into Article 3.1a, which is safety, 3.1b, which is EMC, 3.2, radio performance, 3.3, which is a bunch of other stuff, and 3.4, the common charger requirements. For 3.1a, safety, 3.1b, EMC, and 3.4, if we've got a harmonised standard, that's great news. It gives us presumption of conformity. If we don't have a harmonised standard, the manufacturer assesses to whatever standard they can use, but there isn't a mandatory need to go to a notified body. For Article 3.2, the radio performance, and those Article 3.3 things, which include cybersecurity, if a harmonised standard exists, the manufacturer assesses to those standards, and then they don't need a notified body. If the standard exists but isn't harmonised, or if there is no harmonised standard, the manufacturer still does their own assessment, but then they need to go to a notified body to get a certificate at the end of it. I keep hearing people saying, I'll need to go to a notified body to get my testing done. That's not correct. Notified bodies cannot test, must not test. So the manufacturer still gets their testing done either at a lab or themselves, but you have to go to a notified body for a certificate. So we have these 3 standards, the EN 18031-1, -2 and -3. They've been submitted to the European Commission. They might get listed on the official journal. They might not get listed on the official journal, or they might get listed on the official journal with some restrictions applying. Now, if they get listed on the official journal with no restrictions, then a manufacturer does their assessment and they can choose to get a notified body certificate if they want, but they don't need to. If the European Commission simply refuses to list them on the official journal, or maybe even says to CENELEC, we won't list them, here's a list of things you'd have to change, CENELEC are pretty much saying, it's too late now, we're not going to do those changes. What we would do is remove every reference to the Radio Equipment Directive and just provide them to industry as standards for you to use anyway, non-harmonised. The third, I'm not a gambling man, but if I had to put my money anywhere, they could list the standards on the official journal with some restrictions, some clauses that say, we're listing this standard, but this test case has this restriction, this test case has this restriction, that sort of thing. And then you would need a notified body if those test cases or restrictions apply to your product. So let's say, for example, one of the test cases might have a decision tree and the European Commission don't like the choices. They might say, if you take this route through the decision tree, it's fine, but if you take one of these other routes, we don't like it. Or if this whole test case applies to you, we don't like it. And so then for any manufacturer where that test case applies or that clause of the standard applies, then they'd say, right, well, the standard isn't harmonized for that clause, so we need to go to a notified body. The notified body would have to review the whole standard and the whole radio equipment, but because of that restriction, but it's still useful information and it's still better than no harmonized standard at all, in my opinion.
Great. Well, thank you for trying to explain that. It's a complicated topic. To help with some of this understanding, we at Element, we've put a little flow diagram together actually that explains what route you would follow if you're under the Radio Equipment Directive versus the CRA. If you want a copy of that, either go to the Element website or drop us a note and we can point you in the right direction of where that's located. And in terms of services that we offer, Element is a test organisation, so in terms of cyber, being able to assess products for cyber, as well as the notified body and extending our notified body scope to include the type examinations that you were talking about. Yeah. So feel free to go to our website, drop Michael or myself a note if you need any more information.
Yeah. And a last comment on the topic of timelines and details. So the Radio Equipment Directive cyber requirements begin from the 1st of August 2025. So that means that delegating act, that cyber requirement, doesn't exist legally until that date. So the manufacturers should be beginning to assess their products. The standards are available. They've been available for many months. So manufacturers, you should be doing these assessments yourselves, become familiar with these standards, reach out to labs like Element by all means, and get your assessment done. If you want a notified body certificate, legally you need to wait until the 1st of August 2025 because that's when it begins. But if they said, well, a notified body can't do anything until the 1st of August 2025, that would make the 31st of July a very busy date for all notified bodies. So the notified body, of course, could begin to do some work, and notified bodies have even started to issue certificates now. But it's important to remember that that certificate does not become a legal document until the 1st of August 2025, even if the notified body issues it now. So the European Commission has made it very clear that the notified body must put a date of applicability on that certificate saying, look, we're issuing a certificate now, it covers cybersecurity, but this isn't valid until the 1st of August 2025. And then similarly with the CRA, I've thrown out the date 11th of December, but be careful, that doesn't mean every aspect of the CRA comes live on 11th of December 2027 because there's some reporting requirements and there's various dates actually for different things. The main CRA start date is the 11th of December 2027, but get in touch because there are some reporting and some other requirements that happen on different dates around that.
Great stuff. All right. Hope you enjoyed that content. If you did, like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video. Thank you.